Keanu had never seen Los Angeles this quiet, not even at 4 in the morning. The city lights blurred past his car windows as he drove faster than he should have, knuckles white on the steering wheel, jaw locked so tight it hurt. Every few seconds his eyes flicked back to the passenger seat, where Sandra's phone lay face up, the last message from an unknown number glowing on the cracked screen. If you want to see her alive, don't call the police. He could still hear the voice from that call, rough and calm in a way that made his stomach twist, too calm for someone threatening a life. Someone who had done this before. Sandra, hours earlier, had been laughing at the same phone, teasing him about his terrible selfie skills while they sat in the corner of a quiet restaurant in West Hollywood. She had been tired, he could see it in her eyes, but still she listened more than she talked, asking the waiter about his night, about his second job, tipping him double with that quiet kindness she tried to hide behind jokes. Keanu had noticed how people relaxed when she smiled, how the stress in their shoulders seemed to melt. That was one of the reasons he trusted her more than most people in his life. She never used her fame to make someone feel small. If anything, she used it to make them feel seen. The kidnapping didn't happen with movie-style explosions or car chases. It was painfully simple, so ordinary it made Keanu feel sick. 1 second she was standing beside him outside the restaurant, wrapping her coat a little tighter, breathing out small clouds of white in the cool night air. The next second a black van rolled to the curb, doors sliding open with terrifying precision. 3 men in dark clothes moved faster than his mind could react. One grabbed her, another flashed a gun low at his waist, just enough for Keanu to see. The third looked straight at him, eyes empty, and murmured, "Don't be a hero." Sandra's phone hit the pavement, the van door slammed, and the back tires screeched as it tore away into traffic. It had taken less than 8 seconds. 8 seconds that Keanu would replay in his mind over and over, each time wishing he'd moved first. Now, speeding through the city, he kept hearing her voice from earlier that night, soft and serious for a brief moment between jokes. "You know what scares me," she had said, staring at the table instead of at him. "How easy it is to become cold. To let the world beat you down until you just stop caring." He had laughed it off, nudged her shoulder, told her she was incapable of being cold. But he'd seen it before in himself, the quiet temptation to retreat, to stop trusting, to guard everything. Tonight, when he watched that van vanish, he'd felt something inside him harden in a way he didn't recognize. And yet, sitting in his car now, he realized he was more afraid of that coldness than of the men who'd taken her. He pulled onto a darker side street and stopped, the engine idling, his chest heaving like he'd run a race. He wanted to call the police. Every rational part of him screamed for it. But the threat in the kidnapper's voice echoed, "We know where you live. We know your people. You bring cops into this, and she dies slow." He thought of the quiet life he'd tried to build, of the small crew of people he still considered family, of the years he'd spent learning to accept grief without letting it rip him apart. He had lost too many people already. The weight of that history settled in his chest, a familiar ache, but tonight it felt sharper. This wasn't just another tragedy waiting to happen. This was Sandra, the one person who always treated him like a man first, a movie star second. The one who made sure to ask if he'd eaten, if he'd slept, if he was okay, without ever demanding an answer. A second message appeared on her phone screen, snapping him out of his spiral. "You will follow instructions exactly. We chose her because of you. Don't disappoint us." Those words made his blood run cold. Because of you. This wasn't random. Someone had studied him, calculated him, decided that the best way to hurt him was to take the one person he would never be able to live with losing. Anger rose in his chest, hot and dangerous, fighting with the fear pounding in his veins. He felt an almost overwhelming urge to smash something, to drive the car straight into a wall just to make the noise in his head stop. But underneath that storm, there was another feeling, quiet but stubborn, a refusal to let this become just another story of senseless loss. Not this time. He forced himself to breathe slowly, deliberately, the way he'd learned on long, lonely nights when the world felt too heavy. Courage, he reminded himself, wasn't the absence of fear. It was making a choice while fear screamed in your ear. He scrolled up through the messages from the unknown number and noticed something he'd missed in his panic. The first one had come minutes before they'd left the restaurant. "Nice dinner. She laughs a lot for someone who has no idea what's coming." They had been watched longer than he thought. That meant this wasn't sloppy. This was planned, organized. Mafia, he thought suddenly, the word hitting him with an icy clarity. Not just criminals. A network. A system. Men who wouldn't hesitate. Men who had done this 100 times and walked away smiling. For a brief second, the thought crashed into his mind. What if I can't save her? And he felt tears threaten, burning behind his eyes. But with that fear came something else. The memory of Sandra on set years ago, comforting a young extra who'd forgotten her lines and broken down crying. She had wrapped an arm around the girl, whispered something that made her laugh, then said quietly, "We are not here to be perfect. We are here to do our best, even when we are shaking." Keanu had watched that moment from across the room and thought, this is what real strength looks like. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just kind, especially when you don't have to be. He stared at the phone, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and straightened in his seat. Whoever these men were, whatever mafia world they crawled out of, they had made one mistake. They believed his kindness was weakness. They believed his quiet life meant he wouldn't fight. They didn't know about the years he'd spent rebuilding himself from nothing, about the nights he'd battled thoughts that wanted him to give up entirely. Compared to that war, these men were just another enemy. And he wasn't alone. He still had contacts, people who owed him favors, people with shadows in their pasts who tried, like him, to walk the straight path, and who still remembered how to fight when pushed. The phone vibrated again, more urgent this time. Get to Mulholland Drive overlook. 20 minutes. Come alone. If you're late, we send you proof she's suffering. Keanu checked the time, did the math, and realized they were deliberately cutting it close. They wanted him panicked, sloppy. They wanted control. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the choice in front of him. He could obey, hope they kept their word, and risk walking straight into a trap. Or he could take a different path, one that required every ounce of courage, humility, and trust he had left, one that might mean breaking his own promise to stay away from the darker corners of the city. When he opened his eyes, a strange calm settled over him, like the stillness before a storm. His fingers hovered over the screen, not to call the police, but to tap a number he hadn't dialed in years, a number he'd sworn he would never need again. The line rang once, twice, and just as he wondered if the person had changed it, a low, familiar voice answered, laced with a dangerous kind of curiosity. "I told you, if you ever called me again, it meant something had gone very, very wrong." What happened, Keanu? He swallowed, staring at the dark road ahead, and realized that the next words out of his mouth might decide whether Sandra lived or died. They took Sandra's blindfold off so suddenly that the light stabbed into her eyes like knives. For a few seconds everything was a blur. Shapes, shadows, a smell of gasoline and damp concrete. Her head pounded. Her wrists burned under the plastic cuffs cutting into her skin. She tasted blood at the back of her throat and realized she must have bitten her lip in the struggle she could barely remember. What she remembered, clearly and in awful detail, was Keanu's face on the sidewalk as the van door slammed, eyes wide, helpless, that split second where his hand almost reached for her and then froze when he saw the gun. That image lodged itself in her chest now, heavier than the fear. The room they'd put her in looked like the back of an abandoned auto shop. Metal shelves with dusty tools, an oil-stained floor, a single flickering fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Her chair was bolted to the ground. There were no windows. On the far wall, a metal door. Standing between her and that door, watching her with unsettling calm, was a man in his late 50s in an immaculate black suit that didn't belong in a place like this. His hair was silver at the temples, his face unscarred, his hands too smooth for someone who lived in darkness. His eyes, though, his eyes were dead. On either side of him stood two younger men, arms folded, tattoos peeking out from under their sleeves, guns visible on their belts. No one was trying to hide what this was. Sandra forced herself to breathe slowly, to stop her shoulders from shaking. Years of cameras in her face had taught her how to control expression, how to calm herself from the outside in. She swallowed, lifted her chin just a little, and met the older man's gaze. "You picked the wrong actress to kidnap," she said, her voice hoarser than she expected but steady. "I don't even open big movies anymore. Your marketing plan sucks." One of the younger men snorted, surprised by her nerve. The man in the suit didn't smile fully, but the corner of his mouth twitched with a kind of amused respect. "I was told you were funny," he said, his accent not quite local, something Eastern European, softened by years in Los Angeles. "I hoped that rumor was true. It makes this easier." "Easier for who?" she shot back, heart hammering. "Because if you think Keanu's going to." "We didn't take you for him to do something stupid," the man interrupted calmly. "We took you because he won't." He took a few slow steps toward her, his shoes clicking softly on the concrete. "My name is Victor. Some people would call me a businessman. The police would call me something less flattering. But labels are not interesting. What matters is that your friend has something I want. And the only thing in this world that will make him move quickly is you." Sandra felt a sharp flare of anger under the fear, like a small flame refusing to die. She thought of all the times people had underestimated her, treated her like an image, a smile on a poster, a concept more than a person. "You don't know him," she said quietly. "If you hurt people to get what you want, you've already lost." Victor actually laughed at that, a low, controlled sound with no warmth. "You Hollywood people," he said, shaking his head. "Always talking about winning and losing like life is a script. Listen to me carefully, Ms. Bullock. I do not enjoy violence. I consider it a failure of negotiation. But I am very good at correcting failures." He nodded toward one of the men, who stepped forward and wordlessly tilted Sandra's chair back an inch, making her feel suddenly less grounded, more exposed. "You will not be harmed if he cooperates. If he does not," Victor paused, looking down at her face as if studying a painting. "I wonder how long that courage of yours will last." Her throat tightened, but she held his gaze. Fear was crashing inside her, yes, but underneath it something stubborn pushed back. Years after the car accident that took her mother, she'd promised herself one thing. She would not be the kind of person who let tragedy turn her into stone. She would keep feeling, keep caring, even if it hurt. Right now, that promise meant she had to care about more than just herself. She had to care about what happening here might do to Keanu. "Listen," she said, softening her tone deliberately. "He's gentle. Too gentle for this. If you push him into your world, you don't just hurt him. You break him. Is that what you want on your conscience?" The word landed heavier than she expected, conscience, and for a flicker of a moment, she thought she saw something shift behind Victor's eyes. Not guilt exactly, but recognition. As if the word reminded him of someone he used to be. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers now. Sandra could smell expensive cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something metallic. Do you know what kind of courage a man like him has? Victor asked quietly. Not the kind from your action movies. Real courage. The kind that keeps breathing when life puts a bullet in your heart. Men like that, they fascinate me. His gaze hardened. And men like that don't break easily. They bend. They adapt. They make deals with devils to protect the people they love. The phrase cut through her, the people they love. No tabloid nonsense, no jokes about speed reunions. The way he said it felt heavier, like he'd studied them deeper than any gossip magazine ever had. Her mind rushed back to late-night conversations on set years ago, two tired actors sitting on folding chairs, sharing stories they never gave in interviews. Grief. Loneliness. The quiet terror of being known only for the characters you played. She remembered the way Keanu listened, never trying to fix her, just being there. How, over the years, he'd become this steady point in her life, neither demanding nor distant. A friend, yes. But sometimes, when they hugged goodbye, there was that split second where neither of them let go right away. A question hanging in the air that neither was brave enough to answer. You think he loves me, she said slowly, the words tasting strange on her tongue, not because they were foreign, but because saying them out loud made something inside her tremble. That's what this is. You're betting his feelings against your greed. I do not bet, Victor replied. I invest. I have done my research. I know his past. The women he's lost. The tragedies the world whispered about and then moved on from. Do you really believe he will risk watching another woman die because of him? Her chest ached at the thought, like someone pressed hard on an old bruise. She closed her eyes for a moment, seeing Keanu in that restaurant just hours ago, the way he'd listened to the waiter talk about his sick mother, the way he'd quietly slipped cash under the check without making a show of it. He carried his pain like a shadow, always there, but never used as an excuse to be cruel. He was gentle, yes, but she knew there was steel under that gentleness. The kind of resilience that comes not from winning, but from surviving losses that should have broken you. Sandra opened her eyes again, and something in her had settled. She was still afraid, but the fear had shape now. It was no longer a wave trying to drown her. It was a weight she could lift, inch by inch. You're underestimating him, she said, calmer now. He's not going to just do what you say. He's going to look for a way to beat you without becoming you. Her lips curved into the faintest, defiant smile. That's the difference between courage and whatever it is you think you have. One of the younger men moved as if to hit her, anger flashing in his eyes at her tone, but Victor raised a hand and stopped him. He studied her quietly for a long moment, then gave a small nod, almost like he was acknowledging a worthy opponent. You are a problem, he admitted. I see why he cares for you. You remind him of who he wants to be. He straightened, turning toward the door. We will see who wins this little test of character. He started to walk away, then paused and glanced back over his shoulder. For now, you sit here, Ms. Bullock. You breathe. You wait. And you hope that the man you believe in is as strong as you think, and that he is not as stubborn. He tapped lightly on the metal door, and one of the guards opened it. Sandra's heart raced as she watched him about to leave. She knew once he walked out, the countdown would really begin, some invisible clock ticking down to whatever he had planned for Keanu. This might be the last chance she had to shift anything, to plant even the smallest seed of doubt in this man's ruthless mind. The moment stretched, her mind scrambling, searching for the one thing she could say that might matter. Her voice came out raw but clear, cutting through the stale air just as his hand touched the doorframe. If you make him choose between my life and his soul, she called after him, her eyes burning, you might win your game. But you'll lose the last piece of your own humanity you've got left. And I don't think you're as far gone as you pretend. Victor stopped, his back still to her. The guards exchanged quick, uneasy glances, not sure why their boss suddenly froze. For a single heartbeat, the buzzing lights seemed to grow louder, the whole room holding its breath. Victor's shoulders rose and fell in a slow, measured inhale. Then, without looking back, he stepped through the door and let it slam shut behind him, the echo ringing in Sandra's ears. Alone now with the two silent guards, her wrists still bound, her heart racing, she stared at the closed door and realized something devastating and electric all at once. If Keanu really was on his way, if he was really about to walk into Victor's world, it wasn't just her life balancing on the edge. It was the fragile, hard-won goodness inside the man she cared about more deeply than she'd ever had the courage to admit. Keanu didn't answer the question right away. On the other end of the line, the silence stretched, heavy, except for the faint hum of a television and a distant siren drifting through someone else's open window. His grip on the phone tightened. Saying the words out loud would make them real in a way that the van, the message, even the threat hadn't yet. His throat worked, but nothing came. Keanu, the voice said again, more gently this time, edged with concern. Talk to me. What happened? He swallowed hard. They took her, he forced out. They took Sandra. A brief pause, then a low exhale, almost like a curse, but quieter. Who? I don't know yet, he said, his voice rough, the words tumbling over each other. Mafia. Organized. Not amateurs. They knew where we were, they knew our timing, they knew. He cut himself off before his voice could crack, pressing his fingertips into his eyes until he saw sparks. They took her because of me. On the line, there was no surprise in the answer, only a grim understanding. Then this is about you, the man replied. Not ransom. Not chaos. Leverage. A rustle, like someone getting up from a couch. Tell me everything. From the moment you saw them. Keanu stared out at the empty road, replaying it again in his mind like a scene from a film he wished he could rewrite. As he spoke, about the van, the gun, the messages, the meeting point at Mulholland, the other man listened without interruption. That was why Keanu had called him. Not because he trusted his kindness. Because he trusted his clarity. This was someone who had survived the same city by learning its ugliest rules and then, years ago, walking away from them. Not entirely clean, Keanu knew. No one ever walked away entirely clean. But cleaner than most. You've got 20 minutes to get there, the man on the phone said when Keanu finished. They're playing with your panic. They want you to show up alone and blind. You can't do that. If I don't, Keanu said, staring down at Sandra's phone, at the glowing threat, they hurt her. They said they'd send proof. And you believe them? Yes. The honesty in that simple word hurt more than lying could have. There was a time he might have assumed criminals bluffed more than they followed through. But he'd seen too much of the world, visited too many places where life was cheap and power was everything, to hold on to that illusion. The violence in Victor's voice, the calculation in his timing. This wasn't someone who bluffed. If this is who I think it is, the voice continued, they don't bluff. They punish. Fast. Public. That's how they keep control. Keanu closed his eyes. You know who this is. I have a guess, the man said. There's a Bratva-linked outfit that's been buying up small crews in the valley. They call the boss Victor, but that won't be his real name. Old school code. Very polite, Very professional, very unforgiving. I heard he likes psychological pressure. Making good men do bad things. He thinks it proves something about the world. The description landed like ice in Keanu's chest. Making good men do bad things. He thought of Sandra's words, just hours earlier, about the fear of becoming cold. Was this Victor's game? Dragging them both towards some twisted belief that kindness was weakness, that everyone broke the same way under enough pressure? So what do I do? He said, the question coming out rawer than he intended. Humility had never been difficult for him, not after everything life had stripped away, but asking for help like this, admitting he was lost, was a different kind of vulnerability. I go there. I play along. I stall. I what? You do two things, the man answered. First, you go. If you don't, she pays the price. Second, you don't go alone, no matter what he says. You bring someone who can watch your blind spots. I can't bring cops, Keanu said. He said. I didn't say cops. A brief, humorless chuckle. You think I'm calling the police on a man like Victor? No. You bring me. The suggestion hung in the air between them. Old memories stirred, grainy news articles, half-whispered stories on sets about that guy Keanu used to know, the one who'd grown up in a world of favors, debts, and unspoken threats. Elias. They'd met by accident in the 90s. Two nobodies with cheap apartments and big, blurry dreams. Keanu had chosen cameras and scripts. Elias had chosen the city's underbelly. Years later, when their paths crossed again, when Keanu needed help getting a stalker to back off without headlines, Elias had delivered. Quietly. Effectively. And then he'd warned him, if you ever hear my name connected to anything again, walk the other way. The life I live will stain you if you're not careful. You're out, Keanu said now, the words half question, half plea. You told me you were out. I'm trying to be, Elias replied. But there are some men you don't just quit. You reduce contact, you move slowly, you redirect favors. You negotiate your way toward a different life. I've been doing that for 5 years. I've still got numbers in my phone I wish I didn't. Tonight, for once, that's a good thing. He paused. Let me help you. Let me earn a little piece of the man I'm trying to become. That stung in a way Keanu didn't expect. The shame wasn't just about needing help from someone like Elias. It was about dragging someone who was clawing his way toward light back into the shadows. If you come, Keanu said quietly, you put yourself back on his radar. You undo years of work. And if I don't, Elias countered, an innocent woman suffers because some rich ghost from my old world decided to use you as a chess piece. I've done a lot of wrong, Keanu. Too much. I don't get many opportunities to tilt the scale the other way. Don't take this one from me. The sincerity in his voice cut through the fog in Keanu's mind. Kindness didn't only belong to the clean. Sometimes it was the bruised, flawed people who reached for it the hardest. He thought of Sandra in that chair, or wherever she was now, probably terrified, probably already calculating ways to protect him even from a distance. It broke him a little to imagine her worrying about his soul while someone held a gun nearby. Fine, he said, exhaling slowly. Where do we meet? Don't move, Elias replied. Text me your location. I'm closer than you think. Keanu ended the call and stared at his reflection faintly visible in the windshield. Eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled, jaw clenched with a kind of quiet rage he wasn't used to carrying. He'd spent so much of his life trying not to add more pain to the world. To move softly. To be careful with people and their feelings. Now, for the first time in years, He could feel the sharp edge of anger pressing against his ribs, whispering that maybe softness was a luxury men like Victor existed to destroy. "Don't become cold," he heard Sandra's voice echo in his mind. "Don't let the world beat you down until you just stop caring." He forced himself to breathe. Caring didn't mean being passive. Caring could mean fighting, but fighting for something, not against everything. He could be sharp without being cruel. He could be relentless without losing the parts of him Sandra believed in. The parts he wanted to believe in too. Headlights appeared in his rearview mirror faster than they should have at this hour, then slowed as a dark sedan pulled up alongside his car. The passenger window rolled down to reveal a face that time had hardened but not completely closed off. Elias looked older than Keanu remembered, more lines around the eyes, more grey at the temples, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. There was a small scar along his jaw Keanu was sure hadn't been there before. "Get in my car," Elias said, his voice low but steady. "Leave hers here. If they're watching, they expect you to show up alone. They won't think you're smart enough to switch rides in a dead zone." Keanu grabbed Sandra's phone, slid out of his car, and into Elias's. The interior smelled faintly of leather and coffee. A small rosary hung from the rearview mirror, worn and shiny from years of fingers rubbing the beads. The sight of it jarred him. He didn't remember Elias as religious. Maybe people who'd seen too much darkness eventually reached for something to hold on to. "They said Mulholland Overlook," Keanu said as he buckled his seatbelt. 20 minutes. We are already burning time." "We'll make it," Elias replied, shifting into drive. "But we are not walking in blind." He handed Keanu a slim earpiece from the center console. "Put this on. Don't look at it. Just do it." Keanu hesitated. "I'm not wired. I'm not recording." "I know," Elias cut in. "This isn't for cops. It's for me. You go where they can see you. I watch where they don't want you looking. I'll have eyes on the area before you step out of the car. You just stay present. Breathe. Don't let him push you into panic decisions." As the city lights of Hollywood began to fall away behind them, replaced by the winding darkness of Mulholland Drive, Keanu felt every twist of the road as if the mountain itself were testing his resolve. Houses glittered below like constellations, silent witnesses to a night that felt too big for any one human to carry. He glanced at Elias, at the way his hands relaxed but ready on the steering wheel, and wondered, not for the first time, how many nights like this his friend had survived, and at what cost. "Why are you really doing this?" Keanu asked quietly as they climbed higher. No speeches. Just the real reason. Elias kept his eyes on the road. "When I was a kid," he said after a moment, "there was this neighbor who used to sneak us food when my old man disappeared for days. She didn't have much, but she had this rule. If I can help, I will. If I can't, I won't pretend I can." His jaw tightened. "I spent 20 years in a world where people pretended to help while they were stabbing each other in the back. You're one of the only people I've ever met who still lives by her rule without even knowing it." He glanced over. "You've helped me more than you realize, just by not judging me. Let me return the favor." The words landed heavier than any gunshot. Keanu looked away, out at the sprawling city below, feeling a sting behind his eyes he didn't have time for. He'd always tried to be kind not because he wanted to be someone's hero, but because he knew how much it meant when someone saw you as more than your worst day. Hearing that his quiet attempts had mattered to someone like Elias gave him a strange, fierce hope, even now, barreling toward a danger he didn't fully understand. They crested a rise, and the familiar pull-off of the Mulholland Overlook came into view, an ink-black patch against the sky, a few parked cars scattered like forgotten thoughts. Elias slowed, killed the headlights before they fully entered the lot, and coasted the last few meters in near darkness. 3 cars, he murmured, scanning quickly. 1 black SUV, 1 motorcycle, 1 sedan with tinted windows. They're early. That's good. Means they're not worried. That's good. Keanu whispered, incredulous. It means they're arrogant, Elias clarified. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Sloppy is something I can work with. He pointed with his chin. You'll walk to the railing. Make sure they see Sandra's phone in your hand. That tells them you're following their script. You talk. You listen. You don't agree to anything permanent. You keep her alive, 1 sentence at a time. I'll be close enough to hear him breathe. Keanu nodded, his heart pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his fingertips. He slid the earpiece into his ear. It fit snugly, almost invisible in the dim light. As his hand brushed his chest, he realized it was shaking. He curled his fingers into a fist, then slowly released them, forcing his muscles to obey. Keanu, Elias said softly, stopping him with a hand on his arm before he opened the door. One more thing. Whatever he offers, money, safety, some twisted deal, remember who you are. Men like Victor, they try to prove that everyone is as corrupt as they are. Don't give him that satisfaction. Not even to save her. We find another way. The words dug in painfully because they hit the exact fear he'd been trying not to name. What if saving Sandra meant crossing a line he couldn't uncross? What if the price of her life was the piece of his soul he had left? I don't know if there is another way, Keanu admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias's gaze was steady, unwavering. Then we make one. The door clicked open, and cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint smell of pine and distant exhaust. Keanu stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots louder than it should have in the quiet. Every parked car looked like a threat. Every shadow felt like eyes. He could feel, more than see, movement near the black SUV as a figure stepped out, tall, composed, wearing a suit that caught the faint starlight. As Keanu walked slowly toward the overlook, Sandra's phone burning like a brand in his hand, a single thought throbbed through his mind, equal parts terror and resolve. If I lose myself to save her, she'll never forgive me. So I have to find a way to save us both. The suited figure took a few deliberate steps forward, the gravel crunching in response, and as he drew closer, the harsh lines of his face came into focus. His eyes were calmer than they had any right to be, like he was arriving at a business dinner rather than a kidnapping negotiation. Mr. Reeves, the man said in a smooth, accented voice that matched the one from the phone. Thank you for being punctual. Keanu stopped a few feet away, his heart thundering, and finally looked into the eyes of the man who held Sandra's life in his hands, unaware that, in the darkness just beyond the circle of light, someone else was watching him every second, ready to act on the smallest opening. Victor's shoes barely made a sound on the gravel as he closed the distance between them. Up close, Keanu could see the small details that hadn't come through over the phone, the precise silver at his temples, the faint thread of a scar disappearing into his hairline, the careful, unhurried way his eyes studied everything. This was a man who walked through danger like it was a boardroom. A man who had survived by never, ever rushing. You came alone, Victor observed, his gaze flicking briefly to Sandra's phone in Keanu's hand. Good. I appreciate a man who understands instructions. Keanu forced his breathing to slow, grounding himself in the feel of the cold air on his face, the rough edges of the phone under his thumb, the distant hush of the city sprawled out below. You called, he said evenly. I answered. Where is she? Ahead of schedule, Victor replied, almost pleasantly. I like that. He tilted his head, taking in Keanu's tense shoulders, the controlled anger in his jaw. You care for her very much. The statement barely scratched the surface. Keanu didn't answer, but something raw flickered across his face before he locked it down again. He could feel Elias's silent presence in his ear, not speaking yet, but there. Waiting. Watching. Victor smiled slightly, as if he'd noticed the micro-expression and filed it away. Let us not waste time with lies, he continued. If I tell you she is alive and unharmed, you will want proof. If I tell you I mean her no permanent injury, you will not believe me. So, let us begin with the only thing that matters in situations like this, trust built on fear. He reached into his pocket slowly, no sudden moves, no theatrics, and pulled out a sleek black phone. He held it up where Keanu could see the screen. A live video feed flickered to life. The room was familiar even though Keanu had never seen it before. Metal shelves, concrete floor, a harsh fluorescent light. And in the center, Sandra, tied to a bolted chair, eyes red but blazing with something that looked a lot like defiance. For a moment, all the air went out of Keanu's lungs. The world narrowed to the tiny screen, to the rise and fall of her chest, to the faint bruise on her cheek. She was there. She was breathing. She was trying, he could see it in her forced stillness, not to let them see how afraid she really was. Sandra, he whispered, before he could stop himself. On the screen, as if she'd heard something in the room beyond the camera, Sandra's head snapped up. Her voice came through tinny but clear. If this is live, tell him to stop apologizing in his head, she said to no one he could see. This is not his fault. The words hit Keanu like a physical blow. She knew him too well. Even tied to a chair, she was trying to carry part of his emotional weight. It was so deeply, infuriatingly her that he felt both gratitude and guilt twist together in his chest. Victor's lips curved in appreciation. She is very perceptive, he remarked, lowering the phone but not ending the feed. The tiny rectangle of Sandra's image stayed there between them, pulsing like a heartbeat. This is the situation. She is alive now. What happens in the next few hours depends on you. Tell him I told you he's stubborn as hell, Sandra's voice floated faintly through the tinny speaker. And that I swear to God, if he does something stupid, I'll. The video shifted slightly as someone off-screen adjusted the angle. They hadn't muted her, hadn't silenced her. Part of Victor's strategy, Keanu realized with a chill. He wanted her voice here. He wanted Keanu to feel every word. What do you want? Keanu asked, dragging his eyes away from the screen and forcing himself to meet Victor's gaze. You didn't do all this for ransom. Correct, Victor said. If I wanted money, I would have taken a studio executive. They are worth more and loved less. His smile faded. I want something only you can give me. Elias's quiet voice finally slipped into Keanu's ear, so soft Victor couldn't possibly hear it. Stay quiet. Don't fill the silence. Let him talk. Victor watched him, waiting for questions, demands, outrage. When none came, his eyes narrowed with faint curiosity. You are calmer than most, he observed. Interesting. Usually by now there is shouting. Threats. Promises of revenge. He studied Keanu, like he was examining an unusual specimen. You know why I chose you, Mr. Reeves. You think you do, Keanu said, his voice low but steady. You think I'm predictable. Quiet. Controlled. Easy to manipulate because I care. A small spark of amusement lit Victor's eyes. You are not completely wrong. Caring is the finest leash in my business. But no, that is not the only reason. I chose you because men like you make the most, Instructive examples. Elias's whisper pressed into Keanu's ear again. He's selling a philosophy. Don't buy it. Make him specify. What example? Keanu asked, keeping his tone flat. For who? For everyone, Victor replied simply. For the men under me who are getting restless. For the younger wolves who think kindness is a liability in our world. They admire you, you know. Your humility. Your reputation for decency. They say, look, Victor, even with all that loss, he is still soft. Still kind. Maybe your way is not the only way. He shrugged faintly. Bad for morale. The admission landed like ice water. Somewhere out there, men who did terrible things were using his name as proof that staying human was possible. A strange, bitter mixture of hope and horror twisted in his gut. So you kidnapped my friend, Keanu said slowly, to prove to them that I'll become like you if you push hard enough. Not in those words, Victor replied. That would be gauche. But yes. More or less. He took a small step closer, the video of Sandra still glowing between them. I want them to see that in the right circumstances, good men make ugly choices. That the line between us and you is not as wide as they think. If that's what you want to prove, Keanu said, anger sharpening his voice, leave her out of it. Come after me. You want to see if I break? Fine. Test me. Don't make her bleed for your ego. On the screen, Sandra's eyes filled, but she blinked hard and set her jaw, refusing to let the tears fall. Even pixelated, Keanu could see the fury in her. Not just at what was being done to her, but at what this was trying to do to him. Victor's expression didn't change. I am already coming after you, he said. She is the lever. You are the door. I want what is behind it. Elias's voice ticked in Keanu's ear. Ask him what the job is. He didn't go to this trouble just to philosophize. What do you actually want me to do? Keanu asked. Spare me the speeches. Give me the specifics. Now Victor smiled, a thin, businesslike curve. Very well. You have, let us say, a unique currency. Your face. Your name. Your ability to move through certain circles with no suspicion. There is a man I need to meet. A man who does not meet with people like me. But he will meet with you. Keanu's stomach tightened. Who? A charity investor, Victor said casually. Very soft-hearted. Very rich. He has been moving money into shelters, legal clinics, small organizations that keep certain, vulnerable communities from falling into my hands. Noble work. Infuriating for my accountants. His eyes glinted. We have been trying to persuade him to partner with us for months. He refuses to return our calls. But when my people told me he funded one of your pet foundations, I thought, there is my opening. Elias swore under his breath in Keanu's ear, barely audible. He wants you to walk this guy into a trap. Public enough to look harmless, private enough to disappear him. Don't agree. Stall. I'm not going to help you hurt some guy who's just trying to help people, Keanu said sharply. You know that. Yes, Victor said calmly. Right now, you are still idealistic enough to say that. That is why we are having this conversation before anything unfortunate happens to Ms. Bullock. He lifted the phone slightly, a reminder without even looking at the screen. I am not asking you to hurt him. I am asking you to invite him to dinner, to sit with him, to make him feel safe, to let us observe, nothing more. Observe from where? Keanu asked. A rooftop? A van? Another table with guns under their jackets. Victor's smile was maddeningly polite. Logistics are my concern, not yours. You will be paid, of course. Handsomely. I don't want your money. Then give it away. To an orphanage. To another of your charities. I don't care. But you will do this. The warmth left Victor's tone as cleanly as if someone had flipped a switch. Because if you refuse, I start teaching my men a different lesson. He tapped the screen twice, and the camera angle shifted. One of the guards stepped into frame next to Sandra, standing just a little too close. His hand rested casually on the back of her chair, a silent promise. Sandra's jaw tightened. Don't you dare, she snapped at the camera, her voice buzzing through the tiny speaker. Keanu, listen to me. Do not trade someone else's safety for mine. That's not who you are. I'm not. The guard reached down and gripped her shoulder, hard enough to make her gasp. Victor raised his hand without even turning the volume up. She is very brave, he said mildly. But bravery, like kindness, has limits. You think I won't test them? You think I haven't before? Elias's whisper pressed into Keanu's ear. He'll escalate. But if you give in now, he owns you. Not just for one job. Forever. The conflict tearing through Keanu's chest felt physical, like someone was reaching in and trying to rip him in two. Every instinct he had screamed at him to do whatever it took to make that guard step back, to make Sandra breathe easier, to stop the trembling in her voice. But another part of him, quieter but stubborn, knew something else. Once you agreed to hurt one innocent person to save another, you stepped onto a slope that only tilted one way. You picked the wrong person, Keanu said, and he was surprised to hear how hoarse, how tired, his own voice sounded. Not because I'm a movie star. Because I've already lost too much. You think that makes me softer. It doesn't. It just means I know what it feels like to live with the things you can't take back. He swallowed hard, eyes burning. If I do this, if I walk that man into your hands, I'll have to live with it for the rest of my life. You're not just asking for a favor. You're asking for my conscience. I'm not giving you that. For the first time, something like genuine interest flickered across Victor's face. He looked almost pleased. There it is, he murmured. The line. He glanced down at the screen. She told me you would say something like that. That you would rather suffer than become like me. He looked up again, his gaze razor-sharp. So let us see how much suffering you can tolerate. He tapped the phone again. In the video, the guard's hand slid from Sandra's shoulder to her throat, not squeezing, not yet, but resting there with cold promise. Sandra closed her eyes briefly, sucking in a careful breath, then forced them open again. Keanu, she said, and now her voice shook, not from fear for herself, but for him. If you do this for me, they'll never stop. Do you hear me? You'll just be theirs. Don't give them that. Not for me. Her words shattered something in him and held it together at the same time. This was who she was. Even with a stranger's hand at her throat, she was fighting for his soul, not her life. His chest hurt so much he thought he might be sick. Kindness, courage, humility, resilience. Every value he'd tried to live by was being twisted into a weapon against him. Time, Victor said quietly. I do not enjoy what comes next. But I will do it. Because my men are watching. My enemies are watching. And they need to see that even the gentle ones break. Elias's voice came through the earpiece now with an urgency that bordered on harsh. You need leverage. Right now he owns all the fear. You need to give him something confusing. Something that shakes him. An idea flickered at the edge of Keanu's panic. Reckless, risky, but maybe the only card he had. He thought of Victor's almost imperceptible reaction when Sandra had spoken about his humanity, about the peace he might still have left. This man wasn't a cartoon villain. Somewhere under the ice, there was history, there were choices that had led him here. If he couldn't match Victor's cruelty, maybe he could throw him off balance with the one thing Victor didn't seem to understand: genuine, unapologetic vulnerability. "Stop," Keanu said suddenly, his voice cutting through the night like a crack of thunder. "You want an example? You want your men to see what real strength looks like? Fine. Then you let her go, and you keep me instead." Elias hissed in his ear, "Careful." Keanu pushed on, heart slamming against his ribs. "Not a trade where you get what you want and then kill us both anyway. I'm not an idiot. I'm saying this. You say you're fascinated by men who keep breathing after life puts a bullet in their heart. You want to prove to your men that everyone breaks? Test me. Up close. Without using her. Hurt me. Starve me. Drag me through whatever nightmare you think proves your point. But you let her walk out of this. You never go near her again." For a moment, the entire overlook seemed to hold its breath. Victor stared at him, something sharp and calculating shifting behind his eyes. On the screen, Sandra shook her head violently, tears finally spilling over. "No," she choked out. "Keanu, don't. Don't you dare." "That's not courage," Victor said slowly. "That's martyrdom. Very romantic. Very cinematic. But not useful to me. You dying, or even suffering, in some hidden room does not send the message I need." "Then make it public," Keanu shot back, surprising even himself. "You want your men to see me bend? Keep me in your world long enough and they will. But they'll also see this, that when you tried to make me hurt someone innocent, I refused. That I walked into hell on purpose, not because you trapped me there." Elias's voice came through, low, amazed. He's flipping the narrative. If Victor takes that bait, he risks turning you into a legend, not a warning. That scares him. Watch his eyes. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced at the screen again, at Sandra's tear-streaked, furious face, then back at Keanu. For the first time tonight, there was something like a crack in his composure. Not sympathy, not yet, but a fracture in the airtight logic he'd constructed around this cruel theater. "You are infuriating," he said quietly. "You keep trying to turn my lesson into yours." He stepped closer, until Keanu could see the tiny flecks of gold in his irises. "Do you know what men in my world fear most, Mr. Reeves? Not pain. Not death. Meaninglessness. The idea that their suffering will have no story, no lesson, no glory. You are offering to suffer in a way that makes you the story, not me. Why would I agree to that?" "Because you're tired," Keanu said, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Victor. "Because underneath all of this, you're exhausted from proving, over and over, that the world is as ugly as you are. Because men who are truly ruthless don't need an audience. You do. And deep down, that bothers you." For a flash of a second, pure rage flickered across Victor's face, not at the insult, but at the accuracy. Elias let out a barely audible curse in Keanu's ear. "Now you've poked the wound. Either he kills you here, or he listens." Victor lifted the phone one more time, the video feed of Sandra trembling slightly as his hand tightened around the device. The guard's hand was still at her throat, but he hadn't squeezed. "Not yet." "In the next 5 minutes," Victor said, his voice colder than it had been all night, "you will show me why your way is stronger than mine. Why I should consider even a fraction of what you are asking. Because right now, Everything I have seen in this city tells me the opposite. That kindness is a mask people wear until it is inconvenient. Convince me I am wrong, or watch me prove that I am right." The guard's fingers flexed, just enough to make Sandra gasp and pull against her restraints, the sound tearing through the tiny speaker and straight into Keanu's bones. His heart slammed, his mind raced, his values and his terror crashed together in a storm so intense he could barely breathe. And as the night seemed to close in around them, with the city lights below and the cruel, patient eyes of a mafia boss locked on his, Keanu realized that the next words he spoke, filled with every ounce of courage, humility, and broken, stubborn hope he had left, might be the only thing standing between the woman he loved and a darkness that could swallow them both. For a moment, Keanu said nothing. The wind moved around them, cool and thin at this height, carrying the faint hiss of the freeway below. 5 minutes, Victor had said, but the real clock was faster. Every second meant that hands stayed on Sandra's throat. He stared out over the glittering city, not to escape, but to ground himself. Somewhere in that sea of lights were a million quiet acts of goodness that would never make headlines. A nurse staying late. A stranger paying for someone's groceries. A kid standing up to a bully. None of those people were here to help him. None of them could stop Victor's men. But the fact that they existed, that people chose kindness every day in a brutal world, was the only reason he hadn't given up on his own. In his ear, Elias's voice was low, urgent. "You can't out-logic him. You have to get under his skin. Make this personal. Make him see himself in you, not just your weakness." Keanu took a slow breath, then turned back to Victor. "You want me to convince you you're wrong about people like me," he said quietly. "But you already know you are. That's why you went to all this trouble." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You assume much. You spent money, time, men," Keanu went on. "You could have grabbed any rich idiot with a conscience and forced him to do your one job. But you pick me. The man known for turning down roles that don't feel right. For giving money away quietly. For taking the subway instead of hiding behind tinted glass. If you really believed kindness was just a mask, you'd let time rip it off. You'd wait for me to disappoint people on my own. Instead, you dragged me out here to prove your point with a gun to someone's throat. That's not confidence, Victor. That's fear." A muscle ticked in Victor's jaw. On the phone screen, Sandra was watching, eyes wide, every word landing on her like a lifeline. The guard's hand pressed a little harder against her neck, and she winced, but she never took her gaze off the camera. "I'm not afraid of you," Victor said. "I didn't say you were afraid of me," Keanu replied. "You're afraid of what I represent to your men. To the younger ones. A man who loses everything, and still chooses not to become bitter. You can't control that. You can't buy it. You can't threaten it into existing on your terms. So you're trying to drag it into your world and break it where everyone can see." Elias murmured, "Good. Keep going. Make this about his reflection, not yours." "You talk about lessons," Keanu continued, the words gaining strength as he spoke them, drawn from someplace deeper than fear. "About examples. You think if you force me to betray an innocent man, you prove we are all the same underneath. But that's not what your men will see. They'll see a scared actor under a gun doing what scared people do, making bad choices. They won't think, kindness is a lie. They'll think, even he can't fight Victor. That doesn't make your philosophy true. It just makes you a more efficient bully." Victor's smile vanished entirely. For a heartbeat, his eyes went flat, dangerous. "Careful." "No," Keanu said, surprising himself with the steadiness in his own voice. "You said you wanted the truth. Here it is. You are not trying to prove that kindness is weak. You're trying to justify the fact that you gave it up. Somewhere a long time ago, you had a choice. Maybe someone hurt your family. Maybe the world turned its back on you. And you decided that the only way to survive was to stop caring. To become this. He gestured at the empty overlook, the armed shadows, the glowing video of a woman with a stranger's hand at her throat. Now you spend your life collecting proof that you were right. Because if you're wrong, if there is a way to live with pain and still be kind, then you wasted your soul for nothing. And that would destroy you. The night seemed to tighten around them. Elias whispered, barely audible, "He's either going to shoot you or crack." Victor inhaled slowly, nostrils flaring just a fraction. For the first time, his gaze drifted, not to the city, but somewhere inward, as if the words had hit a place he usually kept locked away. On the phone, Sandra's lips moved. Yes, yes. She was willing him to keep going, even as she strained against the guard's grip. "You want a lesson for your men." Keanu said, softer now. "Here's one. Real strength is waking up every day with a broken heart and choosing not to make other people pay for it. Real courage is being gentle when you have every reason to be cruel. Anyone can become what you are. It doesn't take genius to pull a trigger or sign a death order. The hard thing, the rare thing, is staying human when life tells you not to." Silence. Victor's face was unreadable, but something was happening behind his eyes. A calculation struggling against something older, rawer. He looked down at the phone again, at Sandra, then back at Keanu. "You speak as if you know pain," Victor said quietly. "But I know your story. Tragedy made you famous for being tragic. People admire how you smile through it. They buy tickets and feel inspired. You are rewarded for your sorrow. Do you know what my sorrow got me? A dead mother in a Soviet building stairwell and a father who sold me to his creditors at 15. There were no interviews. No sympathy. Only a lesson. The world does not care about your softness unless it can sell it." Keanu swallowed, his chest aching. For a flicker of a second, Victor didn't look like an untouchable boss. He looked like a boy who had believed the world's worst message about himself and never found anyone to contradict it. "You're right," Keanu said quietly. Elias murmured, startled, but Keanu pressed on. "You're right that the world treated us differently. My pain got attention. Yours got silence. That's not fair. That's not how it should work." His voice roughened. But the hurt underneath, it's the same shape. Losing someone you love? Being taught you only matter when you're useful or dangerous. I know that part, Victor. I just had people, rare people, who refused to let that be the end of my story. You didn't. And that's not your fault. But what you do now, this is. Victor's fingers tightened around the phone. On the screen, the guard's grip reflexively tightened a little too. Sandra choked, coughed, then breathed, her eyes never leaving the camera. She was crying now, silently, not for herself, but from the sheer intensity of what was unfolding. Two men, opposite ends of the moral spectrum, pulled toward a fulcrum that might change everything. Elias's voice was a low current. Offer him something he's never had. Not a deal. A way out, even if he won't take it. "You said earlier," Keanu continued, "that men like me fascinate you. That you watch us keep breathing after life shoots us in the heart. You think we are, what was the word? Instructive." He took a step closer. From the SUV, someone stirred, but Victor lifted a hand minutely, holding them back. "Let me be instructive, then. Not with a job. With a choice. You can end tonight one of two ways. One, you hurt her. You force me to hurt someone else. You prove to your men that fear works, that you're still the biggest monster in the room. Congratulations. Nothing changes. You go back to your empire and wait for the next challenge to your worldview. 2. You let her go. You let us walk away. You tell your men, I could have broken him. I chose not to. They'll call it weakness, at first. But some of them, the ones who are already tired, they'll see something else. What? Victor asked, his voice low, dangerous. Enlighten me. They'll see a man who still has a choice, Keanu said. A man who can still decide, even after everything, not to add more pain to the world just because it's profitable. They'll see a different kind of power. One they've never been allowed to imagine, the power to stop. The word hung there, stop, like a foreign language. In his ear, Elias whispered, barely breathing, I've never heard anyone talk to him like that. Victor's expression flickered. The hand that held the phone trembled, just once. He looked down at the screen again. Sandra was watching him now, really watching him, not as a captor, but as a man on a cliff edge he didn't realize he was standing on. You think I can just... Stop, Victor said, a bitter laugh escaping him. Walk away. There are men behind me. Above me. Money. Blood. History. Do you think they will allow it? Do you think they will say, Victor has found his conscience. Let us give him a gold watch and a pension? No, Keanu said. They'll try to crush you. Like they crush anyone who walks away. Ask Elias. For the first time, Victor's eyes snapped fully to Keanu's left, to the shadows just beyond the reach of the Overlook's weak lights. Keanu felt Elias's breath catch in his ear. A tiny miscalculation, using his name aloud, had pulled him into the open. A shape shifted behind a low concrete barrier. A man stepped out, hands raised, nothing visible in them but open palms. Elias. Older. Wearier. But standing. Hello, Victor, he called quietly. 2 of Victor's men stepped from the SUV in an instant, hands moving toward their jackets. Victor snapped his fingers once, and they froze, guns half-drawn, eyes sharp. I told you, Elias went on, voice steady. If I ever showed my face in your orbit again, it meant something had gone very, very wrong. Victor's gaze went flat. Elias. I should have known. The disappointment in his voice was almost paternal. So this is your doing? No, Elias said. This is your doing. I'm just adjusting the angle. He nodded toward Keanu. You wanted an example for your men? Here. He tapped his chest. You remember what I was. What I did for you. Who I heard on your orders. You know exactly how deep in your world I was. And yet I'm still here. Not dead. Not in prison. Not your property. How? Victor's eyes were ice. Because you were useful. Because I started saying no, Elias corrected. Quietly at first. Then louder. I took smaller jobs. I redirected violence where I could. I burned some bridges. I paid for others in blood. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't sudden. But every day, I picked one thing I would not do. One line I would not cross, no matter how much you paid me. You called it weakness. I called it practice. Victor watched him, something dark and complex moving in his gaze. The men by the SUV shifted, uncertain. You think you can teach me ethics now? Victor said, almost amused. You, who once put a gun in a priest's mouth because I asked you to. Pain flashed across Elias's face, raw and unhidden. Yeah, he said hoarsely. Because I've spent 10 years trying to live with that. 10 years trying to scrape that moment out of my soul. I have nightmares about that man's eyes, Victor. I see him every time I close mine. Don't you dare use my worst day to prove you were right about me. I already know I was wrong. That's why I'm here. He gestured toward Keanu. He's offering you something I never had. A chance to choose better before your nightmares wake you up at 3 a.m. and never let you rest again. The wind picked up, stirring Victor's jacket. He looked from Elias to Keanu, to Sandra on the screen, and for a second, he seemed like someone on a narrow ledge, the drop invisible but instinctively felt. You both talk as if redemption is accessible, Victor said slowly. Like a door you can simply walk through if you are brave enough. You forget something. Men like me are useful. We are needed. You clean ones sleep better because we exist to do what you will not admit keeps your world turning. Keanu shook his head. No, Victor. That's the lie that keeps you chained. Without me, worse people would do it. Without me, there'd be chaos. It's just fear dressed up as responsibility. You think if you step back, the world will fall apart. It won't. It will hurt, yes. It will shift. But you are not holding up the sky. You're just holding up your own prison bars. Elias exhaled sharply. He's right, he said. You walked me into that lie when I was 20. I believed it. I thought hurting people was a kind of necessary evil. But evil is never just necessary. It grows. It always wants more. It wants your sleep, your smile, your memories. One day you wake up and realize you don't remember how to be anything else. Sandra's voice came from the phone, ragged but clear. And then someone like him, she tipped her chin toward the camera, meaning Keanu, walks into your life and reminds you. That's what scares you, doesn't it, Victor? The possibility that there is another way. Because then you can't hide behind I had no choice anymore. The guard's hand eased, just a fraction, from her throat. Victor noticed, glanced down at the screen. The man stiffened and gripped her again, but not as hard. Even his instincts were slipping. You are all very eloquent, Victor said finally, his voice tight. You speak of choice as if it is not shaped by hunger, by fear, by the weight of every decision that came before. Do you know how many men I have buried because they believed they could walk away clean? How many families I have watched bleed because someone thought a kind word could undo a contract written in blood? His gaze locked on Keanu's, razor sharp. You think I am afraid of kindness. I am not. I am afraid of what happens to those around me when I pretend this world will be gentle just because I wish it so. Keanu felt a surge of fierce, almost painful compassion for this man he should have only hated. Victor had twisted his own protectiveness into justification for a lifetime of harm. Somewhere inside, he still believed he was shielding someone, some version of himself, some echo of his younger self, from a worse fate. You're right, Keanu said softly. You can't just wish the world gentle. You have to build it, one brutal choice at a time. It's hard. It's slow. People die anyway. You're not wrong about that. His voice thickened. I've watched people I love die despite every good intention. Being kind didn't save them. It didn't reward me. Sometimes it felt pointless. But when I look back, the only parts of my life that feel worth anything are the moments I chose to be gentle anyway. Even when it cost me. Especially then. He took one last step forward, close enough now that if Victor pulled a gun, he wouldn't have to aim. Keanu's heart hammered, but he held Victor's gaze steadily. You want to see if a good man will do something ugly to save someone he loves, he said. Here I am, Victor, shaking in front of you, with everything on the line. And I'm saying no. Not because I'm brave. Because I'm terrified of waking up tomorrow as someone I can't live with. If you kill her now, you'll prove one thing, that you're willing to destroy the last good pieces of yourself just to avoid admitting you were wrong. Is that really the example you want to leave behind? The question hung between them, sharp as glass. In the soft shadow, one of Victor's younger men shifted his weight, unease flickering across his face. The other glanced at him, something unspoken passing between them. Even here, at the edge of violence, the words had found cracks. On the phone, Sandra whispered, "Please," but it wasn't to Keanu. It was to Victor. Something broke then, not cleanly, not dramatically, but like an old, rusted hinge finally giving way. Victor's shoulders sagged a fraction. He looked suddenly, achingly tired. "You think if I let you walk away, you will go back to your quiet lives," he said slowly. "You will sleep. You will heal. But you are wrong. You will carry me with you. In your nightmares. In your stories. Every time you talk about kindness, you will think of this night and wonder if you only survived because a monster decided to be merciful." "Maybe," Keanu said. "But I'll take that over wondering how many people died because I was too scared to say no." Elias added, voice rough, "And maybe that's how it starts, Victor. Not with some clean, holy transformation. Just one night where you choose not to add another body to the pile. One night where you let someone live who was supposed to die. You won't be a saint. You'll still be you. But it'll be a crack in the wall. And walls fall, eventually." A long, shuddering silence. The wind, the city, the faint hum of tires far below. Keanu's pulse roared in his ears. Victor stared at him for what felt like an eternity, searching his face for something. Weakness, duplicity, maybe a hint of self-righteous arrogance he could use to harden himself again. He found none. Only exhausted, trembling sincerity. Very slowly, Victor raised the phone to his mouth. "Let her go," he said. Keanu's knees nearly buckled. On the screen, the guard blinked. "Boss," he said, startled. "You heard me," Victor replied, voice like iron. "Cut her loose. Put her in a car. Drop her at the intersection of Sunset and Fairfax. No detours. No bruises. If I see so much as a scratch that wasn't there before, I will know." The guard hesitated only a second more, then nodded sharply. The camera shook as he set the phone down, then moved behind Sandra. There was the sound of a knife sawing through plastic. Her shoulders sagged with sudden freedom. She pulled the blindfold from around her neck and sucked in a shaky breath. "Wait," she said, turning toward the phone, her eyes wild. "What about?" The feed cut suddenly as the guard ended the call. The screen went black. For a second, Keanu thought his heart had stopped altogether. "Is she?" "She is alive," Victor said. "For now." Elias took a tiny step closer from the shadows. "And him?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Keanu. Victor looked at Keanu for a long time, then at Elias, then at the city beyond them. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, stripped of its velvet layer. "Do you know what will happen when word spreads that I let you go?" he asked. "That I had leverage and chose not to use it?" "Yeah," Elias said. "Some will call you weak. Some will smell opportunity. The wolves will circle. But some—" He glanced back at the SUV, where the younger men stood frozen, hanging on every word. "Some will rethink everything you ever told them about power." Victor's gaze followed his. He saw the flicker in his men's eyes, the confusion, the recalculation. A future he couldn't entirely control had just begun without his permission. "Maybe that is my punishment," he murmured. "To live long enough to watch my own mythology collapse." He turned back to Keanu, and for the first time that night, there was no pretense in his expression. Just a man standing in the ruins of his certainty. "You will not call the police," he said. "If you do, the ones above me will not be as contemplative as I am. They will not negotiate. They will not listen. They will hurt people around you until you learn what real fear is." "I won't call them," Keanu said. "Not out of fear. Because this isn't over yet. Not the way you think." Victor stuttered him. "You still believe you can fix this? That one merciful night can redeem a lifetime? You are consistent. I will give you that." He nodded once to Elias. I should have killed when you walked away. Maybe that was my first sign of weakness. Or my first crack in the wall, as you say." "You don't have to keep calling it weakness," Elias said quietly. "You can just call it tired. I know you are." Victor's eyes flashed, then dimmed. "Get him out of here," he said, jerking his chin toward Keanu. "If I see either of you again, I will not be so open to speeches." He turned, signaled to his men. They climbed back into the SUV. As the engine rumbled to life, Victor paused with his hand on the open door and looked back one last time. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "be very careful with the story you tell about tonight. Heroes are useful to men like me. They distract people from how much blood we spill while they applaud you." Keanu met his gaze. "Then maybe," he said, "you should spill less blood." For the faintest moment, Victor's lips twitched, as if he almost smiled at the absurdity of that simple answer. Then he slid into the SUV, the door thumped shut, and the black vehicle rolled away into the darkness, tail light shrinking, then vanishing around the curve. The moment they were gone, Keanu's legs gave out. He stumbled, catching himself on the cold metal railing, his breath coming in ragged gasps as everything he'd been holding and crashed over him at once. Elias was there in 2 strides, gripping his arm. "Easy," he said. "Breathe. It's not over, but the worst of tonight is." "Sandra," Keanu choked out. "We have to." "I know," Elias said. "Get in the car." They drove down the mountain faster than before, but this time, the speed felt different. Less like running toward an execution, more like racing toward a fragile, impossible reprieve. Elias took side streets, cut through alleys, avoided major intersections. "If his men are watching," he muttered, "they'll expect you to go straight home or straight to the cops. We'll do neither. We pick her up, then we disappear somewhere quiet. We talk. We plan. We decide what story we are going to tell, and to who." "Do you think he'll really let her go?" Keanu asked, staring at the dark blur of the city through the window, every muscle in his body taut with dread. Elias hesitated only a heartbeat. "He already did," he said. The moment he said the words. A man like that doesn't take orders back. Not in front of his men. If they drop her where he said, she's ours. They reached Sunset and Fairfax in under 15 minutes. The intersection glowed with the usual late-night chaos, neon signs, rideshare cars, kids laughing too loudly on corners. It looked offensively normal. Then Keanu saw her. She was sitting on the low wall in front of a closed coffee shop, arms wrapped around herself, hair tangled, eyes scanning every passing car with a frantic hope she was trying and failing to hide. A black sedan was just pulling away from the curb, its windows too dark to see inside. No one looked at it twice. Keanu flung the door open before the car had fully stopped. He stumbled onto the sidewalk and ran. Sandra's head jerked up. For a second she just stared, as if afraid her mind was playing a cruel trick. Then she was on her feet, and they collided in the middle of the sidewalk, arms wrapping around each other so tightly it almost hurt. For a long moment, there were no words. Just shaky breaths, her face pressed into his shoulder, his chin buried in her hair, the thudding confirmation that they were both still here. Then Sandra pulled back just enough to cup his face in her trembling hands. "You idiot," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "You absolute, beautiful idiot. What did you say to him?" "Too much," he managed, a broken laugh escaping him. "Not enough. I don't know." She searched his eyes, like she was checking for something more than physical injury. Something darker. Did you do what he wanted? Did you agree?" He shook his head, and the relief that washed over her was so fierce it made her knees wobble. She sagged against him again, laughing and crying at the same time. "Good," she said into his chest. "Good. Because if you'd saved me by hurting someone else, I'd never forgive myself. Or you. Or him." He tightened his arm around her, the emotion thick in his throat making it hard to speak. "He let you go," he said, "because you wouldn't stop believing I wouldn't break. You annoyed him into mercy." She laughed again, a disbelieving, choke sound. "Annoying men into mercy. Add that to my resume." Elias approached quietly, giving them a respectful distance until Sandra looked up, eyes sharp despite everything. "Who's this?" she asked, instinctively stepping half a foot closer to Keanu, protective even now. "An old friend," Keanu said. "One who knows more about Victor's world than I ever want to. He helped." Elias inclined his head, a little awkward. He said. "I'm sorry for what you went through." She studied him a second longer, then nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. "No questions. No demands. Just that." It startled Elias more than any accusation would have. "Come on," he said. "We shouldn't stay here. Too public. Too easy to follow." They piled into the car, Sandra in the back, Keanu beside her despite Elias's protest about balancing the weight. As Elias drove, Sandra clung to Keanu's hand like it was the only solid thing in the world, and in that moment, it was. They ended up at a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of the city. Cash payment. No questions. The kind of place where privacy was assumed, for better or worse. Elias took the room next door, giving them space while still staying close. Inside the tiny, dimly lit room, the adrenaline finally began to ebb, leaving behind a deep, shaking exhaustion. Sandra sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands still trembling. "You okay?" Keanu asked, sitting beside her. She gave him a look that was half incredulous, half tender. "I was tied to a chair in a murder IKEA while some guy in a designer suit gave villain monologues," she said. "So, no. I'm not okay. But," she looked at him, eyes softening. "You're here. I'm here. That's my starting point." He swallowed, overwhelmed by the simplicity of that. For a while, they talked in low voices. She told him about Victor, about the things he'd said, the way he'd watched her like a mirror he was trying not to see himself in. Keanu told her about Mulholland, about the job Victor had tried to force on him, about the moment he'd realized he might have to choose between her life and his conscience, and the fact that she'd beg him, even then, not to trade his soul for her safety. "I meant it," she said quietly, "even though I was scared out of my mind." I'd rather be dead than know I pulled you into that darkness with me. That's not love. That's possession." The word hung there, startling them both. Love. Neither flinched. He looked down at their intertwined hands. "There was a moment," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "where I almost said yes. Where the thought of hearing you choke one more time made me willing to do anything. That line everyone talks about? It was paper thin. The only thing that stopped me was thinking about you waking up tomorrow, finding out what I'd done, and looking at me like a stranger. I knew I couldn't survive that. I've lost too much already." Her fingers tightened around his. "You didn't cross it," she said. "That's what matters. The line. You held." He shook his head. "I didn't hold it alone." Silence settled between them, not heavy, but deep. Something had changed, cracked open by terror and choice and the rawness of almost losing each other. The question that had always hovered, for years, in cramped trailers and quiet rap parties and long, meandering walks between takes, sat now in the small space between their shoulders, waiting. Sandra took a breath. "Can I ask you something unfair?" she said. He half smiled. "After tonight, I think we've earned unfair." "Why me?" she asked softly. "Out of everyone he could have taken." "Yeah, he talked about your reputation, your image." "But why me? Why was I the pressure point?" He didn't look away. "Because he did his research," he said. "Because he watched interviews. Read between lines. Because he saw the way I always soften when I talk about you. The way I remember your kids' birthdays but forget my own. The way I trust you with things I don't say out loud to anyone else. He took you because, if I lost you, I don't know what would be left." The confession hung in the stale motel air, fragile and enormous. Sandra's eyes filled again, but these tears weren't from fear. "You know," she said, a shaky smile tugging at her lips, "for someone who was just lecturing a mafia boss about the power of vulnerability, you really took your time getting there with me." He laughed, the sound breaking and healing something in both of them at once. "Yeah," he said. "I did." She shifted closer, until their shoulders touched, then their knees. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like," she admitted. "We are not 20. We are bruised. We have whole galaxies of grief trailing behind us. I'm not some untouched, shiny thing. I'm tired, Keanu." "Me too," he said softly. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe what's left after everything is the real thing. Not fireworks. Just showing up. Holding the line. Helping each other stay soft in a hard world." She studied his face, every line and shadow. "You're really not going to turn this into some movie moment, are you?" she said. "No dramatic kiss in the rain. Just two exhausted people on a motel bed, trying to remember how to breathe." He smiled, weary and genuine. "We can start there," he said. "If you want." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I want," she said simply. They sat like that for a long time. No declarations. No polished speeches. Just two people who had almost been shattered by someone else's darkness, choosing, minute by minute, not to let it define them. In the room next door, Elias sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night swirled in his mind like smoke. Victor's face when he'd heard the word stop. Sandra's eyes when she'd said please. Keanu's stubborn, ridiculous refusal to surrender his conscience even when everything else was on the table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A message blinked on the screen from an unknown number. "You disappointed me tonight. But you also intrigued me." We will speak again. No name. None needed. Elias stared at it for a long time, then deleted the message. He powered the phone off, opened the nightstand drawer, and set it inside. He looked at the worn rosary on the table, then at his reflection in the dark TV screen. One crack in the wall, he muttered to himself. Let's see what we can do with that. Back in their room, Sandra stirred. What happens now? She asked. Keanu thought of Victor, of the young men by the SUV, of all the unseen players in a city that ran on both cruelty and quiet kindness. Now, he said slowly, we rest. We get you checked by a doctor. We tell the truth to the people we trust, and hold it back from the ones who'll only turn it into a headline. He paused. And then, I don't know. Maybe we fund some legal clinics, some witness protection programs, some kids' community centers in the neighborhoods Victor's men recruit from. If we can't go after him with guns, we go after him with less desperate teenagers. Sandra smiled into his shoulder. Weaponized kindness, she murmured. I like it. It's slow, he said. It won't make a cool montage. But it's something. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. You know what Victor said might be true, she said. We'll carry him with us. This night. Those rooms. That hand on my throat. It won't just go away. I know, Keanu said. But we get to choose what it makes us. Bitter. Or braver. She studied him for a long moment, then leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to his forehead. It wasn't a movie climax. It was quieter, deeper, a promise to keep trying. Braver, she said. Together. Outside, the city kept humming, unaware of how close two people had come to breaking, and how, in a dim motel room and on a dark overlook, tiny cracks had formed in the armor of a man who'd built his life on the belief that kindness was a lie. Those cracks wouldn't fix everything. They wouldn't erase the harm already done. But in the days and months that followed, strange things began to happen at the edges of Victor's world. A shipment quietly rerouted away from a school district. A terrified runaway girl guided toward a shelter instead of a gang. A debt forgiven with no explanation. No one could trace those small mercies back to a single night under the Mulholland stars. To a trembling actor refusing to trade his soul. To a kidnapped woman who begged her captor to see his own humanity. To a former enforcer standing between his old life and the man who'd once shown him undeserved respect. But they happened. And somewhere, in a quiet part of Los Angeles, Sandra and Keanu sat on a worn couch, surrounded by take-out boxes and scripts and half-finished charity proposals, still jumpy at loud noises, still haunted by certain shadows, but holding each other's hands a little tighter. They hadn't won a war. They hadn't toppled a syndicate. They had done something smaller and, in its own way, more radical. They had refused to let the darkest night of their lives turn them into people they wouldn't recognize. In a world that profited from cynicism